So we are in our we're in our fourth week of a series called I Am. The idea behind this series is that as we get to know this Jesus that we know and love so much, or are learning to love more as we get to know him more, the more that we get to understand about him and his character and who he is, the more we become like him. And that's what he actually calls us to be. He says, follow me. Jesus came and he said, follow me. He actually had people who followed him, called his apostles, his disciples. They followed him everywhere he went. He modeled everything for them, and they were dumb like us. They didn't get it. And you have to sit them down and go, no, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But in this series, we're looking at Jesus, and he said, I am. And he said he made these several statements. In the first week, we talked about, I am the bread of life. And I gave you guys the analogy of like walking into a room with hot bread and how delicious it smells. I mean, bread is just plain. It's like flour and water and maybe a little bit of egg and some, baking soda or whatever is in there. I don't know. I don't make fresh bread, but it smells delicious then you're like, man, I want that. You walk into a room, there's fresh bread cooking. You're like, give me a piece of that and some butter. And some of you know, you guys like margarine. That's fine. But I want the real thing. I want real butter on whatever it is. This can be in frosting. It can be on whatever it is. Real butter. I've got some of you nodding out there. How many of you are margarine people? Margarine. Yeah. How many of you guys are how many of you are Miracle Whip people and not mayonnaise people? Oh, that stuff's disgusting. All right. Let's get back to this. Don't invite me over for sandwiches if you make sandwiches with Miracle Whip. That's all I got to say. There you go. There we go. We'll leave that one there. But the bread of life. And Jesus was saying this. Here's the idea. He said, I'm the bread of life. I've come to give you life. I've come to give you more abundantly. I sustained you. I make you. And I am the one that you can grab a hold of. And you can be sustained by me. And then the second week we talked about, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And that week, the main point of that week was that the light of the world came to focus us not only on our destiny and our future and give us purpose, but light shines in two directions. It shines out from its source, but light leads us back to its source. And Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And if we follow that source, it leads us right back to the heart of God. And that's exactly where Jesus was leading us. And then he said, you are the light of the world. And here's what he's saying. He's calling us into this co-mission. He's saying, it is your job to be a light, a beacon in this lost and dying world to lead people back to my dad, the love of the Father. I am the light of the world, and you are the light of the world. Last week we talked about Jesus as a shepherd, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to open that up again this week. We're going to talk about Jesus being a shepherd. And last week he said, only my sheep hear my voice. And we watched that cool video where the people went out there and called all the sheep, and they didn't respond. And then the shepherd came out and called them, and all those sheep just perked up and came running to the shepherd. And that's the way that it is with Jesus. He is our shepherd, and following him, we know his voice. It's our job to become his sheep and to learn to hear his voice, that still small voice that would convict you of sin, that would lead you in paths of righteousness, that would lead you to encourage people that you do life with and people in your life. That's what his voice is there for. So you would be so in tune to the shepherd that you would hear him say, do something nice for your coworker. Do something kind for your mother. Say nice words instead of the words that are going right through your mind and swirling around in there. Say good words. That's the voice of the shepherd in your life. And this week, we're looking at Jesus, because here's the reality. Our culture as humans, we have, I believe this, we have an identity crisis. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that everybody's so wrapped up in their identity, and I'm this, and I'm that, I'm this color, and I'm this, or my preference is this, or my preference is this, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, and we're so caught up in this identity, and it's not really who we are. It's all superficial. Because we were designed to be children of God. Our main identity is wrapped up in Jesus Christ. See, we believe that life, it's all about who? Me. That's what our person tells us. It's all about me. And you know this, as soon as you get married, if you've been married, you get in there and it's like, oh yeah, it's great. You eat cake and punch and you go on your honeymoon, and maybe it doesn't even last the honeymoon, but eventually, either the honeymoon or when you get home, there's going to be a fight. Because there's a she me and a he me, right? And I want it whose way? My way. We're all wrapped up in me. We live life in context of, how do I get more of the pie? How do I get more of it for me? I mean, as Americans, we're conditioned to have more. You need a bigger house, bigger yard, better neighborhood, more kids, more cars, more toys, more stuff, right? More things that when you move 3 years later because your old house is not sufficient anymore, you got to get more trucks to move more stuff to the new house so you can move it again 3 years later when you move to another house in a better neighborhood with better schools. And right, we're conditioned for more. And the reality is, I believe it's killing our souls. It's killing us. It feels, it's called a rat race for a reason, because it feels like you're on a hamster wheel and you're getting nowhere in life. And the reality is, deep down, if we're that big H word, honest, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like it's feeding our souls. It feels like it's sucking the life out of us, that we are actually owned by the things that we owned, right? Anybody ever feel that way? You ever bought that shiny car and you're like, oh, this thing's awesome. And then like 3 car payments in, it's got some scratches on it. The kids have spilled stuff in it and there's crayons done it and, the door ding or someone bumped your bumper. And now you don't love the car so much anymore. It's not awesome, but you still got the payment. And that thing owns you. You got to work for a whole week just to make the payment on that thing. It owns your life, and that's where we're settled. We find out who we were made to be by looking at Jesus, at who Jesus says we are, and we find life in him. This is the purpose of life, is to find out who we are in Jesus. So we're looking at Jesus. And we discussed this last week, why sheep need a shepherd. Because sheep are what? Tell me. They're dumb, right? Sheep are dumb. And they're weak, and when they're attacked, they just huddle into a mass, and they're like, sorry, Roy, and Roy just gets eaten, Like, at least I was on the inside of the herd. I'm good. The smartest ones run to the inside and just let the ones on the outside get picked off. They're dumb. They can't fight their way back. And the reality of the reason I love the Bible so much is this, because 700 years before Jesus even came on the scene, the prophet Ezekiel said this in Ezekiel 34, 1 through 16. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to you shepherds of Israel, God's people, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, you clothe yourselves with the wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. Verse 5, so they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Verse 7, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. He's saying again and again, hear the word of the Lord. Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I don't ever want God to be against me. He went on and said, this is what you've done. This is accusation after accusation after accusation. And when God's making accusations against people, he's right. God's always right. And he made accusations against the people who were supposed to be caring for God's people. And he says, you've taken the best. You've used it. You haven't helped them. You haven't healed them. You haven't cared for them. You haven't gone out to find them. Here's the reality. You are terrible shepherds. You're terrible shepherds. And he says again, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths and will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on the day the clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries. I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them in the mountains of Israel. in the ravines and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them in good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in the rich pastures in the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost. I will bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. So we have a picture of bad shepherds, right? And then we have the Lord through his prophet 700 years before Jesus said, I am, what we're going to discover today, the good shepherd. God was saying through his prophet, he was saying, go tell them this. Go tell the shepherds of Israel this. They are bad shepherds, and I'm a good shepherd, and I'm going to care for my people. That's good news for us people, right? Have you ever felt left out or let down by somebody? Feel like you're not guided, you're not being cared for? That's not who God says he is. So the question, do you think we need a good shepherd? I think that's obvious. I think it's obvious. God describes us as sheep, as dumb, as lost, and the reality is, if we're honest again, don't we kind of feel lost in life? I mean, how many times have you asked yourself, you don't have to raise your hand, how many times have you asked yourself, what am I doing with my life? I'm in my 20s now. I don't know what my career, I'm going to college. I don't know what my career choice is. I'm lost. And then maybe you figure that thing out because somebody gets you a job, and now you're like in a marriage, and you're like, I'm lost. I don't know. We're going to have kids. Are we not going to have kids? Are we going to own a house? Where are we going to live? And I'm lost. And then you start having kids, or you do whatever you do. That's what I did, at least. And we had kids, and then you hit 40 or 30 something, and you go, now what? There's a scene in the movie Finding Nemo, and it seems like I love this scene. They've got all the fish, and they're in the fish tank, and their whole thing, they're trying to get out of this fish tank, and they finally realize they get themselves in plastic bags in the water from the fish tank, and they hop out, and they get across the street, and they plop themselves in the ocean, and they're still in bags. And the big spiky one goes, I don't know what his name is, he goes, now what? And the movie kind of ends that way, and I was like, isn't that how we feel in life? Like every time we're like, oh, I got a plan, I'm going to get there, and you get there, and you go, well, now what? What's the next step? Right? Isn't it obvious that we need a shepherd? So into this context comes Jesus. Jesus incarnate. The incarnate means this. It means embodied in flesh, in human form. God made flesh. God knew we needed a good shepherd. He knew he couldn't do it on his own. So what did God do? He said, I had a plan before Adam was even on the land. He said, I've got a plan to redeem these people who are going to screw it up. Why? Because God's already outside of time and in the future. He knew that we were going to mess it up. And he said, I already have a plan. I'm going to send myself in the form of my son to lead these people. Why? Because they need a good shepherd. They don't know how to do this on their own. They need a good shepherd. So incarnate Christ, the shepherd, what was he incarnate into? What was he put into? What world did he find himself in? Was it a beautiful world in which everything was nice? Or was it this world in which all sorts of things were bad and rotten? Was it a world in which people told dirty jokes, were racist, and hated each other? A world in which people didn't think too much of ripping each other off and did their best to avoid working hard? He came into that world. Why? That world was the same as when he came then. It's the same world now, right? Do we need a good shepherd? There's the question today. Do we need a good shepherd? Do we need to be led? Do our hearts need to be led? And do we need to be good shepherds? I think the answer to that is yes. You see, it's always important to understand the why behind the what. Why did Jesus come? To seek and save that which is lost. To redeem those who need to feel redeemed. The ones who are lost, the ones who are broken, to bind up the wounds, to fix those who are hurting, to help those who feel lost and uncertain. You ever been there? I'm glad we have a good shepherd. See, I think the very nature of Jesus using the analogy of shepherd is amazing. In the ancient times, I told you this a little bit. I am going to dig into a little bit more today. Shepherds were hated. Shepherds could not hold public office. It was like, oh, you're a shepherd. You want to run for that, county dog catcher or whatever it is? Like, no, you're not allowed. You're a shepherd. See, classy people wouldn't even buy from shepherds because they assumed that the sheep that shepherds had were stolen. They thought they were stolen goods. And we know differently, right? We know that sheep follow who? They follow their shepherd. But this is what was thought of shepherds. Shepherds went miles away to take sheep out to graze, and they didn't brand sheep back then. They didn't brand them because they would follow them. And owners would pay shepherds in sheep. They would pay, the owners of the flocks would pay them in sheep, but they couldn't sell those sheep. This is so sad. They couldn't even sell those sheep oftentimes because people thought that those sheep that they got paid in were stolen. So the life of a shepherd was really, really difficult. See, there was no more disreputable profession than a shepherd. It was better to be a prostitute in ancient times than a shepherd. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? They couldn't come into the temple and make sacrifices. So if they were Jewish and they wanted to come into the temple, they were not allowed into the temple to make sacrifices. They were despised and rejected. And this is where the God that wants to redeem every lost person who's the lowest of the low steps into history. I think this is really important. That Jesus, when he came, who did he reveal himself? Who did the angels reveal themselves to first? Wasn't it shepherds in the field? And then Jesus says, I am the good what? He didn't say, I'm the good tax collector. He wasn't, tax collectors were up here. Like the guys who took your money and they know they were stealing from you. You knew the tax collector was stealing from you. Still, tax collector, shepherd. And Jesus came into that world and said, I am the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. This is scandalous. But this is a sign of what Jesus was all about, redeeming the lowest of the low, saying to his people, the sheep who were the furthest away, who were lost in the thicket, who were broken and needed binding up. He was saying, I am the good shepherd, good word in there, good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd, and I've come to redeem who? Everyone. This is the story of the gospel. I'm going to the outcast, the lowly. The glory of the God rested on the shepherds because Jesus said, you know what? No matter how far you think you are from me, I'm coming right in the middle of your jacked up, broken, messed up life. The life that if they were on those screens right here, you would be embarrassed and you would get out of this room as quickly as possible because you wouldn't want these people who say they love you to know what you've thought or what you've done in your past. Jesus says, I'm stepping in and I want to redeem that person. I want to give that person hope. See, we may think that Jesus used shepherds coincidentally, but I believe he did it because my God is a good shepherd and he's a redeemer. My God is a redeemer. Jesus wants to redeem the lowest of the low. I don't think I can overemphasize this point. That Jesus, he could have chose any profession in the world to say, I am the good whatever he is. But he chose shepherds because they were the lowest of the low. Here's why. Into the context and to the Jews who would have known the scriptures, Ezekiel just proclaimed this 700 years before. He says this in the book of John. John 10, 11 through 18 says this, Jesus, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks and the flocks are scattered. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up. This command I received from my Father. Jesus has come for the least of these. He's come for the lowest of the low. And I don't know where you think you are, but you're not lower than the lowest of the low. You may feel at times as though you've done things that get you out of God's graces, but you're never out of God's graces. I've said this many times. God comes for you in the worst moment of your life, that most depraved thing that you ever thought you did, the thing that you think would separate you from the very God that made you and loves you so deeply, that very thing that you haven't ever told anybody, or the thing that you think you never would have done and you did it anyways. When Jesus went to the cross, he died for that sin and everything above it. That's what's so beautiful about the Good Shepherd. Why? Because he runs to the lost and he redeems. Jesus has come for the least of these. See, let's look at what the role of the Good Shepherd really is. See, any photo of Jesus and a sheep that I've been exposed to is very clean. You ever seen a picture of Jesus? Go ahead and pop that one up there, Bart. Ever seen one that looks like that? Jesus holding the sheep, beautiful field right there, grass and pasture. Look at this lamb, not a speck of dirt on him. Jesus isn't even dirty here. This is a clean Jesus, right? This is what we think of. The reality is this, though. Sheep are always getting into messes. Always. Let me ask you this. Are you always getting into messes with your tongue, with the things that you do, the actions that you do, the places you get? Are you getting into messes? We are a lot like sheep. They're always getting into messes. They're dumb. They get lost. They get caught in the thickets. They get caught in mud pits. Bart, go ahead and throw up some of those next pictures. This is what it looks like to pull sheep out of mud, right? Think about this. If a sheep gets stuck in the mud, I don't know how strong you guys are. Sometimes it's hard for me to lift up my 5-year-old now, like, oh, my back, oh. I lift my, she's not even in mud, but what do you think a sheep weighs, a full-grown sheep with all that wool on it? What do you think it feels like pulling a sheep out of mud that they're, like thigh deep in there? The reality is, a lot of times the reality is in culture, the shepherd would have to do what? He'd have to get down into the pit himself. He would have to get himself down in the mud next to the sheep, get his arms underneath the sheep, and roll the sheep up and out. Why? Because you can't lift. What he's doing right there, that guy's a stud. Whoever that guy is lifting him out, that's not me. But the shepherd would get down in there and roll them out. What happens to the shepherd in the process? The shepherd gets dirty, right? Jesus gets into the mud pit. Jesus finds you in your dirtiest place. And he says, I'm going to be in that pit with you because I'm going to redeem you from whatever that is. That thing that has a grip on your life, that mud, that dirtiness, that brokenness, that thing that you think you're never going to get freedom from. Jesus says, I'm going to be in that pit with you and I'm going to help you get freedom. Maybe you've got a tongue where you just say mean things to people when you're angry. Man, I don't think I'm ever going to get past that. Jesus can find you there. You think about those thoughts that you think, or maybe it's suicide, or maybe, I don't know what it is. Jesus gets down in the pit there, and he's saying, I will help you out of the pit. We have a loving Savior who goes down into the pit with us. That's a loving Savior that a guy like me, who finds myself in the pit, oftentimes can love. See, what else do sheep do? Sheep get in dangerous situations. Bart, throw those photos up. How in the world? Like, you ever felt like you've been in a spot like that, between a rock and a hard place? Right? Look at that. Go on the next one. What is going on here? How stupid is a sheep? And remember, this is us we're speaking of. How stupid is it? You start walking into thickets and thorns, right? Oh, yeah, let's keep going. Yeah, let's get way back in there. So he's got to tie himself off with ropes and carry myself out of here. How does a sheep even get in? Look at he's thrashed. He's like, red up there on his neck. Go to the next one. There's another one, I think. Look at this. It takes like 2 shepherds to rescue this guy out. Really, how do you get in the water? Are you kidding me? And this is where the sheep find themselves. Jesus is saying, I'm the good shepherd. And he goes, and Jesus put his life at risk, so much so that he had to die on a cross so that our lives could be saved. Why? Because he's a good shepherd, right? He said, I'm the good shepherd. So Jesus is saying he's a good shepherd, and he goes out of his way and puts his life at risk, so much so that he went to the cross. There's a story of a shepherd, one of the kings of Israel, became king, King David, It says this in 1 Samuel 17, verse 34. It says, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When the lion and the bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock, I went after and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it.'" David, the good shepherd. What does a good shepherd do? It cares for its flock, for a stupid old sheep who would get himself stuck between a rock and a hard place, stuck in a thicket, stuck in the mud, time after time. I mean, I don't know if I could ever be a shepherd like that. I mean, really stupid sheep, go ahead and die in that pit. I don't care. I mean, seriously. But the reality is that God's calling us into that, to shepherd people and those people that we find ourselves doing life with us. See, not only do shepherds get into dangerous places and get attacked by wild animals, but they get attacked by the sheep themselves. There's a story. I'm going to botch the story, and Louis will watch it online, and then he'll tell me I got it all wrong. But there's a story. Louis told me the story. He's at his house one day, and a neighbor or a cousin or somebody, they're like, "Can't find my dog." And he's like, "Oh, I think I hear the dog, but it's underneath the house." So Louis climbs underneath the house, and he gets under there, and this dog, small dog, tangled all up in telephone line underneath the house, right? Just, stuck there, growling, an animal would do when it's stuck and it's pinned. And Louis goes under this house, and he gets in there, and he's trying, to untangle it, but he couldn't get it undone, so he had to just reach in there and start ripping and cutting this telephone wire off this dog. The whole time, the dog's biting him and scratching him on his arms, and he's just trying to get him out. He's trying to free him. But the reality is that you and I, there's things that God comes to do and take away from our lives because it's something that's hindering us. It's holding us back. And we so much so fight back against God and say, no, God, that's mine. You're not taking that away from me. And we bite and we claw. And there are things in our lives that if they're taken away would give us a more abundant life. But the reality is that you and I, for some reason, we hold on tightly to those things. And Jesus gets hurt, the shepherd gets hurt, trying to free us from the thing that has entangled us. I think there are things in your lives that have you entangled. And I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you, and pray for me. There are things in my life that say pray for me and pray for one another, bear burdens with one another, that we would just release these things. Because, sometimes we say, God, take these things away from us. And the reality is we kind of want to just hold it, put it in our back pocket. I might need this for a rainy day. How many of you guys have boxes of things that you might need someday? Right? Now, I'll use it at some point down the road. There are parts of our lives that we just, you know what, we got feelings about. Maybe it's dangerous, that person's phone number who we know we shouldn't call, but we can't quite delete it out of our phone. That's going to take me to a bad place. I should get rid of that. I know I should. The good shepherd is saying, get rid of that. And the reality is you're like, I can't delete it because I might need it someday. The shepherd gets hurt in the process. See, Jesus has our best in his mind and leads us toward that. But the reality is oftentimes we kick and scream as he's trying to free us from those things. The Good Shepherd came from heaven to earth to be accused, to be beaten, dirtied, cussed at, persecuted. And he did it all for the sake of love and freedom and redemption and salvation. For us dumb sheep who get into the same crevice between the rock time after time. Really? Really? Again? Seriously? How many times have you gone back and done things again? God, I'm sorry. He's like, that's what you said last time. I forgive you. I forgive you. Likewise, we are called into dark places. We are called to be shepherds. We're called into dark places, and here's the reality. As God leads you out of those things, you are the best person to help lead other people out of it. I have a friend in Arkansas. When I met her, she had attempted suicide multiple times. She was a mess. I mean, a mess. Hardest person I ever had to counsel, help. I mean, it was like deep depression, suicidal tendencies all the time, text messaging me. What do? I feel helpless, right? She's cutting, she's doing things that are detrimental to her body, and I just prayed, and we loved, and our church family and my personal family, we loved on this girl, and it was hard to love on this girl. She'd cuss me out and stuff like that, and we just kept loving. You know what I saw? After time, the love began to creep in like water through a small little crack, and it began to water that heart. It doesn't happen overnight. Still times where she gets angry at me, but the reality is I saw a woman who was so far from God open her heart up to God just a little bit. A little bit does a lot. You know how rocks, you know how mountains get big cracks in them? You know how that happens? Because a little bit of water seeps down in a tiny little crack, and then it gets cold and it freezes. And you know what that ice does? It expands, and what it does is it opens up that crack a little bit further. And the love of God is like water who goes in and begins penetrating season after season and opening up those cracks and breaking up those things. And the water can get down and penetrate to a heart of stone. Even water can move mountains. And the water of the Word and the water of God's love can get down into your life, and it can penetrate the darkest places of your life that you thought God could never get to. And the reality is if you just open up a tiny bit. God is calling us, you and I, as we've come through some of these things, to share our love. I told her, I said, Carol, it's fine. Her video's been online, and she doesn't matter. She's told me 100 times, use my story however you can, because I want people to find life like I've found life. And I said to her, Carol, when it was one of the dark days early on, I said, you know what I love about sitting here with you? Is every moment and every hour and every minute that we spend crying and praying and doing these things, the reality is that those things are penetrating your heart, and God is going to free you from those things, and then he's going to turn your life around, and you are going to be the catalyst to help other young girls and people find life. And she goes, that'll never happen with me. Fast forward 3 years later, she's working in our youth group, and she's like, you'll never guess, there's this one girl who... And I'm like, go ahead and tell me the story. I hear and I told you so in there. I hear and I told you so in there. I told you because my God uses our lives to seek and save that which is lost. Our core value is save people, serve people. What does that mean? It means getting into the middle of the mess. It means being cussed at. People are going to hang up on you. But the reality is your love, your hands and feet, that sign at the lighthouse says God has no hands and feet but ours. Your hands and feet are going to be the ones that touch a life and that light up a life and change a world. Yours. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And he calls us to be good shepherds. There's a story in the book of John 21 where Jesus asks Peter, he says, do you love me? And Peter's like, yeah, I love you, God. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. And he just answered the question, and Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yeah, were you there? Yes. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And a moment later, he says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, didn't you hear me the first 2 times? Yes, I love you. And he said, feed my sheep. Peter was hurt by this. Why was he hurt? Because the reality is, Jesus was asking him this question. Jesus was asking, when he used the word love, we have one word in English, and it's love, right? And a love means I love tacos, and I also love my wife. And there's really no nuance between the two of those. Hopefully you pick up on that, but I use the same word. But in Hebrew, there's not. There are multiple words for the word love. And the word, what Jesus was asking, he said, do you agape me? He said, do you unconditionally love me? Would you give up everything in your life? Is there anything in this life that you love more than me? And he asked the question, do you agape me? And Peter said, yes, I love you as a friend. I phileo you. I brotherly love you. And that's not what Jesus was asking, because he knew it was agape love that Peter would have to sense, that Peter would know. It was that love that would have to transfer for Peter to become who Peter needed to be. And Jesus is asking us this today. He's saying, do you agape me? He's saying this. He's saying, do you love me more than all those other trinkets and things in your life? Will you lay all those things down, and would you help me be a good shepherd? He's saying, would you serve my sheep? Would you love my sheep? Would you use your hands? Would you use your feet? Would you use your finances? Would you use your voice? Will you sit next to somebody who just sucks the life out of you? Because that's how lives are changed. He's saying, will you unconditionally love me? And Peter was hurt because he didn't get it. He didn't get it. And I think the very question comes to us today from the Good Shepherd. He asks us, Jeremy, do you agape me? Do you love me beyond all others? Everything else in this world, would you surrender it all and take up my cross and follow me? And would you go? Would you help sheep out of a pit? Would you get into the thicket? Would you injure yourself trying to save another? Would you put yourself in that situation? Or, as we talked about in the beginning, is it all about me? Because, see, Jesus is calling us from a place. He calls us at the very beginning. He says, come and see. When the disciples started following him, he said, come and see. And he asks us to walk this road like he walked with us. He says, come and die. Come and die to yourself. Leave me behind and walk in the power of my love. And when you do, you will find purpose and lives will be changed for the kingdom. Will you guys bow your heads? Heavenly Father, I thank you for leading us, for directing us, for guiding us. I thank you for your word that challenges us in our place of me. It challenges us to surrender those things that we want to hold on to and put in the back pocket. I thank you that you're a God that cares about the little foxes in our life that spoil the vineyard. God, I thank you that you continually bring things up in my mind that I need to surrender. And I know if you do it for me, you do it for them. So I say, God, please raise up your Holy Spirit in our lives that we would find more of you. We would surrender more of us for more of you, because that's a trade I'll make any day. I thank you for your love. I thank you for getting in the pit with me. When I have a fight with my wife, or when I use my tongue to say unkind words, or when I'm hurtful, or when I ignore people, whatever I do, God, I thank you for being there and picking me up and giving me grace and mercy and leading me in paths of righteousness. I pray that you would continually do that in our lives as we surrender ourselves more and more to you. I pray that your word and your light would get into the crevices of our rocky, hard hearts and begin to expand those. That we'd have a fleshy heart that's totally surrendered and tender to your love and for your acts of service and to bring your kingdom to earth. We ask all these things in your precious name. Amen.